Good afternoon and hello, everyone. My name is Rich Longo, and I'm your host, as always, for Flycast Partners. And thank you for joining us for another webcast. Today, our topic is on living through a ransomware breach. We have two presenters, Aaron Fuhrer and Matthew Fisher, both of Valencia, and we want to welcome them and thank them for helping us with this presentation today. They have well over 20 years in the cybersecurity space and have helped organizations such as Microsoft, TransUnion, the Government of Canada, cities, provinces, national retailers, banks, large private corporations with their cybersecurity concerns. Valencia has successfully responded to hacks by Anonymous and has participated in running hundreds of penetration tests and risk assessments, simulations, and incident response projects to counter a lot of the threats that are out there. They've conducted audit and strategy work and have hundreds of clients and projects that the team have built cybersecurity programs for, including federal government, banks, and national retailers. Before we get started, though, let me introduce Flycast Partners. Flycast Partners offers best-in-class implementation services and training in IT service management, IT asset management, IT operations management, IT security, and enterprise service management, workload automation spaces, all using ITIL best practices. Our professional services team has well over 5,600 professional services engagements, both on site and remote. And as a company, Flycast Partners has close to 1,300 regular customers throughout Canada and the United States. I encourage you to reach out to us at 844-FLYCAST. That's 844-359-2278. And please visit our website and chat with our IT experts. They're standing by Monday through Friday from 8:30 a.m. to 7 p.m. Eastern time. They're happy to get you the data sheets, white papers, training, remote administration services, support, whatever you might be looking for. Just chat. That's what they're there for. Now, without further delay, I'm actually going to pass the baton over to Aaron.
I think I'd first like to just send a quick note of gratitude to the audience. You folks, you're all busy. There's well over 100 of you who are attending the session today. We're here for you. As mentioned, we've been doing cybersecurity work for a long time. Today, what I want to explore and cover off is what it looks and feels like to live through a ransomware incident or ransomware breach, whether we pay or don't pay the ransom. And I want to talk about what are the practices and what are the lessons that we've learned having gone through this multiple times with organizations. This is also a really good opportunity for you folks to treat this as a bit of a ask us anything exercise. Everybody is on a journey in cybersecurity. Nobody is excluded from this trip. And you all have different needs, different states of where you're at in your cybersecurity program. Feel free to use this webinar as an opportunity to open up a discourse and have some conversations around what types of things you might be fixated on or worried about, especially given the current news and the events that's going on about ransomware and ransomware incidents. Now, throughout the webinar today, we'll be having a few questions. The first question is going to come up shortly. And when we do those questions, I'm going to ask you folks, please spend a minute, put your response in. They're entirely anonymous. We promise we're not tracking who says what, but it's going to help us inform the conversation. So this first slide is really briefly a little bit of information about myself, why I feel comfortable and confident speaking about cybersecurity and ransomware. As you can see, it's in part because I've been doing this for a long time. I've spent all of my career working around information and things of value, starting as a stockbroker, moving into behavioral therapy, and then moving into cybersecurity in '98. The first portion of my career, I was a hacker, a penetration tester, a black hat, white hat. The last portion of my career, I worked in audit and program implementation. And today, as mentioned, my consulting firm, Valencia, we're about 30 some people. This is all we do. We build and test cybersecurity programs end to end. Some of the things that have been notable about my own career have ranged from helping places like the National Capital up here respond to breaches from Anonymous, to helping large federal departments create classified networks, and helping countless mid-market private sector organizations deal with cybersecurity needs end to end. Now, today I'm joined by my colleague, Matthew Fish, and I'm going to turn the slides over to Matthew to introduce himself for a moment. Go ahead, Matt.
Hi, everyone. Welcome. And again, as I would say to Aaron, I joined Valencia and I'm very excited to be part of Aaron's team because we have a great culture and it's a client-centric culture and we're about problem solving. And that's really the bottom line. I will say, though, although I've worked as a global manager all over the world, I did personally experience a cyber attack. I was on the plane with the president of Sony. So all I'm saying is that this stuff is real and we're here to support you. So back to Aaron.
Thank you. All right, here's what we're going to cover off. I'm going to try and move quickly through this to give us 10 minutes for question and answers at the end because I expect y'all will have some. First, we're going to talk about why ransomware is where it is today. Then we're going to go through what happens if you have that should have had a V8 moment where you or somebody in your organization fell victim to a potential breach through phishing. I'll describe what happens when an attacker gets into your network, how they penetrate, how they escalate, and then we're going to talk about what it means to recover and what kind of advice we have for you. Now, before I get into the details, we have the first question that I'd like to be able to put forward. And again, this is anonymous. You can answer the question in the chat bar on your side, and this will help us inform the conversation. The first part of this question, have you had a security incident in the last year, you or your organization? Not a ransomware breach. It might have been somebody clicked on an illegitimate link. It might have been that your credentials were harvested. It may have been that somebody installed malicious software or lost a laptop. What I'm interested in is who has had that kind of a security incident in their organizations in the past 12 months. We'll give this poll 30 seconds or so to run. All right, thank you for the results. I expect that you can all see this on the screen. You folks are pretty honest. Average is over 50% of organizations have a cybersecurity incident on a yearly basis. That is trending upwards. Now, this is low in many cases because quite often we don't always know whether we've had a cybersecurity incident or not. And I'll tell you a few stories about why that is and what it looks like later on. But this is not far off the course. Now, the second question I'd like to ask, and we'll flash this one up really briefly, otherwise we'll spend all our time in polls, is whether anybody at this session has lived through an actual ransomware breach. So quick hit, yes or no. Again, we're not recording who you are. Don't know whether it's been you or not. So feel free to answer honestly whether you or your organization have gone through a ransomware incident. That's an unusually high number. About a third of us have lived through a ransomware incident. Now, there's more than one type of ransomware incidents. I hope that for those of you who have clicked yes, that your ransomware breaches have been the type that you were able to skate around and recover from fairly quickly. This increasing trend is concerning but not surprising. Ransomware is the most prevalent type of malicious software on the internet today. So let's go back to our agenda. We'll talk about why that is and what this means. So by way of what we're concerned about, why is ransomware becoming more and more prevalent? What's making ransomware trend up? First off, let's just be clear around what ransomware is. Ransomware is essentially the practice of an attacker trying to place malicious software onto your office, your network, your cloud instances, and encrypt or remove access to that information until you pay an extortion. Simple explanation of what ransomware is. Now, in 2021, we know that ransomware is hugely on the rise. On the left, you can see that there's an alert just from a few weeks ago from the FBI telling us that ransomware is becoming more of an issue. In fact, in this particular case, we know that ransomware is targeting those of us who are working in healthcare, particularly targeted. Ransomware is increasing in part because the value of ransomware is going up. Hackers are making more money off ransomware attacks today than they ever have in the past. And that means that if ransomware pays, organizations are going to continue to do it. The other reason why ransomware is increasing is because we have a high degree of exposure. Ransomware works for a couple of key reasons. The first is that we've got really sophisticated software that's being used against corporate and private sector enterprises. In fact, some of the ransomware traces its roots back to a breach from a hacking group called Vault 7 in 2017, 2018, where they stole some of the weaponized arsenal out of the NSA. We are using sophisticated malware to break into organizations. So ransomware is becoming very sophisticated, it pays well, and we're finding that organizations are still challenged to try and put the right types of controls in place to protect themselves. Everybody is vulnerable. Vaccine manufacturing, hospitals, research labs, schools. You can see some examples here at the bottom. And for those of you who are curious, we have a clickable link that we can send you. That's over 2,500 organizations that were ransomed and had data released publicly in the past 2-3 years. This is a significant trend. Now, what is it about ransomware that is becoming more popular today? It's not new. In fact, the first instance of ransomware was in '89. Somebody mailed out floppy disks containing ransomware on them. It only cost me 189 bucks. Fun fact, the fellow who created the first ransomware was an American. He now runs a butterfly conservatory in upstate New York. So in his particular case, ransomware did not pay, butterfly conservatory did. Ransomware has evolved though. From 1989 to today, ransomware moved from tactics that ended up trying to get people to click on a link and pay with a credit card. Some of you will recognize those fake antivirus threats in the bottom right corner of this screenshot. Early types of ransomware. It was simpler, it was cheaper, it was a gift card, a prepaid credit card. Middlemen would siphon off the profit, so it was difficult to collect large amounts. But something happened with the rise of Bitcoin. By 2015, the FBI estimated that there were 1,000 ransomware attacks per day. Today, in 2020, that number is well over 10,000 ransomware attacks per day. And it makes sense when we take a look at the average ransom payments, 7,000, 40,000, 200,000 last year. I haven't seen stats for 2021, but I can guarantee that they're going to be increased from this. So we know ransomware pays. We know that ransomware is sophisticated. Who are the entities that are committing ransomware breaches? I can't make this stuff up, folks. I've seen it with my own eyes. It's too disconcerting to try and even come up with fake stuff when the real stuff is so disconcerting. Number one with the bullet, the dark players behind ransomware are criminal syndicates, organized crime, sometimes state-sponsored, sometimes not. Some of these groups sound immature. They call themselves Revil or Anonymous. They use 8-bit graphics. They don't write effectively, but their infrastructure is very sophisticated. 3 months ago, a small city got ransomware and we were brought in to help do the incident response. We actually found where the hackers were coming from. It was what's called a command and control infrastructure. In this case, they actually took it out of Utah from a data center. And when we broke into that Utah command and control infrastructure, what we found is that the organized crime syndicate had set up a data center with security controls that were better than many of our clients. Organized crime is investing in ransomware big time. They are also moving into an affiliate model. Ransomware vendors are reselling their products. They are offering ransomware as a service. Many, but not all of them, are operating out of Russia and Eastern Bloc countries, but all of them are monetizing their programs to the point where it's very simple. I could set up a ransomware infrastructure, so could any of you all if you chose to look into it because it's offered as a service. Ransomware firms are also getting bigger and realizing that they've got to manage their own images. So there's two types of ransomware firms I want to talk about really briefly. The first are the actual negative ones. Firms like DarkSide, the hackers who actually hit Colonial Pipeline, realized that they did a big oopsie. Even a week later, no gas at 80% of the pumps in Washington, D.C. And they said, you know what? We are no longer going to attack hospitals, funeral homes, nonprofit firms. Revil, which is another one of the large ransomware groups, said same thing. They're not going to go after government or nonprofit. Too little, too late. We know, in fact, from the news today that DarkSide shut down. Half of their ransom has already been recovered by the US feds. So these firms are becoming more conscious of their image because they do not want to be treated as a target from the federal government and from law enforcement. Some of the other vendors that are operating in the gray areas are also trying to polish their images. There are vendors out there who offer to negotiate and decrypt ransomed or crypto-locked files for you. and some are not scrupulous. There was a quote I found researching for this webinar earlier this week where the CEO of one of these gray market firms, this is public, his name is Monster Cloud, said, we'll get your decryption keys for you, but understand we work in the cloud, or we work in the shadows. How we do it, it's our problem, not yours. So we need to be very careful as business owners, as CISOs, as IT people. We need to understand that how we get our data back may mean that we're putting money in the pockets of gray market or black market vendors, and we've got to be okay with that. We've got to understand that. One of the other really big reasons why ransomware has increased, of course, is that ransomware loves working from home. When you take individuals out of the enterprise, especially those of us who haven't really adopted that zero trust model that we hear bandied about, we know that the risk posture is increasing. In fact, up to 45% of businesses during COVID, during work from home, have had related breaches. And it's because we put them into an insecure environment where we are asking them to operate out of their kitchen table, off of a home Wi-Fi, using a family network or a family computer in some cases. We have also put people into a situation where they need to collaborate, but the water cooler's gone. So how many organizations have kicked up a little shadow group to say, you know what, we're going to use Teams or WhatsApp or whatever product in order for us to facilitate communications? These things create opportunities for hackers to break into our infrastructure. Ransomware loves work from home. So what are the threats that you face? If you're exposed to ransomware or malware, there's a long list. You might find that you're actually susceptible to a denial of service attack from malware. This is where ransomware essentially knocks you off of your own network or encrypts your files so that you can't get access to them. You might find that you've been socially engineered so that somebody is gaining access to your privileged, unstructured data. In fact, last year I was working with the federal agency, and their challenge was that the CFO and the board of directors had all of their emails compromised. And so they were facing a ransomware breach to say, pay us or we're going to release sensitive information from your users' email boxes because we've got privileged accounts. And of course, as a second corollary to that, we see fraud. We see the fake purchase order or the fake invoice coming out of those types of attacks. We see credential stuffing. If I have access to your credentials from elsewhere on the internet, I may use them to try and break into your account or other cloud accounts that are associated with you. And of course, we see data exfiltration. This is when an organization is susceptible to a double extortion technique. I've locked you out of your files and I'm going to post them onto the internet if you don't pay. So pay me once to get them decrypted, maybe pay me again to make sure that I don't post them onto the public internet for you. Here's a question for those of us. If you were faced with a ransomware breach, would you pay? And this is a question that I want you to think about. The federal government is quite clear on this. Canada, United States, Five Eyes, we all say the same thing. Do not negotiate with criminals. But this is a difficult statement to make when you're locked out of your business, when you can't operate, and when you've got to make a decision about being able to let your staff come back to work or shut the doors. And so while the FBI has said do not negotiate, this is not a hard directive. What they have done, and this is coming back to the Biden administration, is in the States, the DOJ is now being instructed to treat ransomware breaches like Colonial Pipelines with the same techniques and severity that they use to catch terrorists and organized crime. This is important. What's also important to understand is that whether you pay or don't pay a ransom, you're still going to be in for a long path to recovery. City of Atlanta 2018 is a great example. Decided not to pay a ransom for $50K, which is a steal at today's rates for ransom, but they ended up spending millions of dollars on recovery. Up here in Canada, the next door neighbor to Alaska, the Northwest Territories, and Nunavut, the entire territory was shut down trying to recover from a ransomware breach because they would not pay ransom for 6 weeks. So we absolutely see implications to paying and not paying that need to be dealt with. One thing that is important to understand is that for every ransomware case that makes the news, there are so many small and mid-sized companies that are not reporting this, that are not communicating this, that are going through their insurance, paying the ransom and going on with their business. So the federal government tells us one thing about ransomware: do not negotiate. We need to make our own decisions about what's right for our business and how to deal with that. Now, how do you deal with ransomware breaches? How do they come in? Well, the easiest way for a breach to come in is when somebody clicks on a phish or an SMS link or a voicemail that causes them to take an action. They are socially engineered. All of these types of social engineering attacks are quite typical. They have the same end goal: steal or damage something that you value, ransom something that you value. How do they get in? Most of the time, we let them in. It could be very difficult to break into a federal bank or a large organization that has lots of layers of security controls, but quite easy if I've got somebody on the inside to simply install some malware on their workstation for me and open up a backdoor. So much of the malware that we see online is intended to get software onto your system so that they can establish a command and control infrastructure, connect back to their servers in the Eastern Bloc, in Utah, wherever they put them, establish a base, learn and look around, and then make multiple backdoors. Now, what's important to understand when you're at this stage of getting software in is that if you're a security expert, you're going to be playing that game of whack-a-mole because your attacker is already into the infrastructure. They've given themselves multiple points of ingress and egress, and so it may not be a matter of symptomatically treating that one point of ingress. Instead, you've got to look for multiple points of ingress and where information is coming from. Now, it doesn't look like what you see on TV. When somebody's breaking in and they're installing software on your devices, it doesn't look like somebody's attacking you with lines of code that are scripting across your firewall. Disregard that. Nobody's typing really fast like they are in Mr. Robot and getting into a prison system in 45 seconds over your CCTVs. There's a lot of time, a lot of planning, a lot of energy that goes into this. Sometimes they're in because they were able to exploit a security weakness in your firewall or your routers. Usually it's because you clicked on that link, you installed that software for them. Why would you do that? Because you were socially engineered, because you were tricked. I'll give you a nice example. Social engineering and spear phishing is not always the simple things. This morning I was doing a podcast and we were talking about a phishing email that looked like it came from Zoom. You guys have all seen those types of things. Starbucks, Zoom, Microsoft, please change your password. Here's an invoice, here's a receipt. What I want to give you an example of is one that's a little bit more sophisticated, what I would call a spear phish as opposed to a general phish. And this is a real world example. The names have been changed to protect the innocent, but here's a real world example where a trusted employee, think of this as perhaps a CFO or an IT administrator, gets an email saying that their son was hurt at school at the Parkway Hospital. And I need you to go and come with a credit card so I can start treatment right away because my wife, she forgot her phone, she didn't bring her wallet. Here's the 800 number, please call. It's a scam. How did they get that information about it that it looks so good? The same way that we let the attackers in, we gave it to them. My name and my email are on my website, my wife and son on Facebook. Facebook also tells them the fact that my son likes to play sports. It'll be near the school. And of course, Parkway Hospital is the closest hospital. I could find that in Google Maps. Open source intelligence lets me create sophisticated spear phishing attacks. Last year, we actually did a social engineering susceptibility index for over 15 public organizations. And what we found is that when we created sophisticated spear phishes like this for organizations that were not really serious about awareness training, over 48% would click on a link. So this stuff works, and it works really well for organizations that are quite sophisticated. This describes the first recommendation that we'll come to at the end of the session, which is about training. We know that breaches happen, by some estimates, 91%, because of spear phishing and social engineering. Now, once the attacker gets you to click the link, they've been on your network for some time, sometimes weeks or months, they've put their backdoors in, they've crypto locked you. 5 weeks ago, I had a client who called me up on Monday morning, and they said, Aaron, we've been locked out of our network. What they learned is that the attacker waited until Friday afternoon when everybody went home and started the hours and hours long process of encrypting the network while they were away, and the client noticed it when they came in on Monday morning. And that's where the pressure and the extortion starts. The first thing that you see are notes that look like these. I mentioned to you that these hackers sometimes come across as being amateurish. They're not, but they communicate oddly. They will write in language like you see on the left. These are actual examples. We are regret, but all your files was encrypted. Or sometimes I've seen ones that make it look really good. We're here to help you. You're very lucky that an amateur didn't break in and make a mess of your infrastructure. We just locked it and we're going to give you the keys and help you protect yourself in the future. We see all kinds of things. My favorite is this one that you see here in the text message, Conti, C-O-N-T-I. This is one of the newest ransomware strains, and this is the exact note that you're going to see on your file server if you get breached. And they're quite good about this. They're going to tell you that not only will they prove their bona fides by decrypting files for you, but if you don't get back to them fairly quickly, they're going to start releasing your data files in a way that's going to make you look really bad. So now I have first contact and the beginning of pressurization. Pressurization is the technique to try and make us think less logically and get to the point where we're putting money in their pockets. What does that look like? Well, the client I was talking about from a few weeks ago, it started with emails to anonymous staff. Like many organizations, we didn't have a breach response plan in place, and this client needed to figure out how they were going to respond, and so they didn't tell anybody what was going on for the first 48 hours. But the hacker didn't wait. They started sending out shaming emails saying, you know what, your organization is being breached, they need to pay. When that did not work, the hackers elevated threatening phone calls, LinkedIn messages, Facebook messages, WhatsApp group messages, all of those things start happening. In some cases, I think this was 2 years ago, the liquor company Campari, they were hacked, and when they denied that they were hacked, the hacker actually took out a Facebook ad campaign against Campari saying, you know what, you have actually been hacked and here's the proof. Last year in South America, a home goods chain was breached, and when they decided not to pay the ransomware quickly enough, the receipt printers started issuing ransomware notes. So we see creative techniques to name, shame, pressurize, and encourage us to pay and paying quickly. And when that doesn't work, we see organizations moving to double or sometimes triple extortion. If you don't pay, I'm going to start releasing files on the dark web. If you don't pay, I'm going to contact your clients and tell them that I've got sensitive data because you breached it. I've even seen it go personal. I've seen executives and board members who were doxxed, who had their personal information published online because their company was not paying ransom. This is serious and significant. And if you're in a large organization who has cyber insurance, at this stage, you're going to be dealing with a breach coach, you're going to be dealing with an incident response firm, and you're going to be getting some sage advice, but nobody is going to protect you from the pressure. Be conscious that this is going to be a challenge for the entire organization. How do you do it? When you're at this stage and you're trying to live through the ransomware breach and you need to make a decision, do I pay, do I not pay? How do I do it? Let me share a little bit of what my own experience has been like. First off, it's complicated. Your life is going to start becoming complicated because you're dealing with a law firm, a cyber insurance firm, an incident response firm, your own IT people, and a hacker or a criminal organization, all at the same time. And if you haven't had a lot of conversations beforehand about what happens if, you're trying to make decisions while you're talking to all of these people. This is a recipe for stress. So my second tip for you folks, and again, we'll come to these at the end, if communications aren't predefined, start dealing with them immediately. My other comments I would make to you is that negotiation techniques work, and they work really well. So some negotiation techniques are to start talking to the attackers quickly. Others are to make sure that you speak with them at their level and in their language, and just recognize one thing, folks. From their perspective, they're just trying to do a job. They really, it's remarkable, but they really are. They feel that this is their day job, and they want to have somebody pleasant to talk to, and they don't care what they did to you. They're there to do their job. So for me, when I've been negotiating with hackers, I've had to learn how to be non-confrontational, how to speak to them at their level, how to make sure that I'm using negotiating techniques that are well-defined and understood in practice, and how to make sure that I'm spending the time wisely for myself and for my clients. Not an easy thing to do. Now, if you've gone to this stage with a ransomware breach and you've made a decision as to whether you're paying the ransom or not, you're going to be on the same journey. If I'm paying the ransom or not paying the ransom, I still need to do forensics and understand what was damaged and how, and recovery, how do I get myself back up and back running? Here's a story of an organization that decided not to pay ransom and what their recovery looked like. You heard me talk about Atlanta. This was a large hospital in Ontario. First, they were hit by a laptop that was socially engineered for the user, spread across the hospital network, and then emails were taken offline, and then healthcare records became harder and harder to get access to. Patients were waiting longer and longer for access to healthcare and information, and the hospitals had to make a decision, 3 large hospitals, to not pay the ransom. All 3 of them did that. What we found in this particular case is that the time to recovery was about as long. They had to restore from backup. It was difficult because they were not testing their backups effectively. And some of their older systems, in this case, they had Windows 95, were hard for them to bring back up and running. The story for this organization who made the choice to not pay the ransom was that they needed to spend even more time and effort understanding how they did recovery and what kind of playbooks they had in place for themselves. Now, what's some of the things that you need to think about when you're dealing with breach response in your own organizations? If you're going through the exercise of negotiating and dealing with the breach and you're now at the stage to do response, what was the hack? How did they get in? What was the damage? How do I respond? The first thing I want you to think about is your communications. We often pause here. In fact, I have had more than half of the organizations I deal with delay their response to the hacker because they needed to make policy decisions. Do I pay the ransom? Under what circumstances do I pay the ransom? What do I tell my staff, my business partners, my clients, my community? How do I craft that message? All that takes time. So get your communications mapped early, write pre-approved scripts, and have the conversation now about whether you pay ransomware and under what circumstances. You cannot do this too effectively too soon. What I've learned is that not communicating doesn't work. Going dark doesn't work. It always backfires on us. It always delays response. So some simple guidance for you here, get your communications down early. On the technical side, and this happens in parallel, those of us who have IT teams, or if we're lucky enough to have a cybersecurity organization in play, we've got technical work to do. The first thing that any incident response firm or organization is going to tell us to do is contain the damage and understand where the demarcation is, where they came in and what they can do. So the first 3 things that I start with is I start by containment, shut off access to the internet, disconnect servers if they need to be disconnected, disconnect the cloud services from the data center, whatever is involved. The second thing that I need my clients and organizations to start doing is monitor, monitor, monitor. Many of us don't do enough security logging, so we need to up and improve that right away. And in fact, some hackers, when they're in my organization for a long time, they turn off the monitoring. Thank you very much. So I've got to go and turn that back on once I kick them out. And then the third thing that we do, and these all happen at the same time, is we implement advanced security controls. Many of us talk about endpoint detection and response in a zero trust world. What this really means is that on my servers and on my workstations, on my network equipment, I need endpoint software that is highly advanced, that is going to work with my antivirus and make sure that they're capturing any remnants of malware or any remnants of a backdoor so that I'm not going to find that I get reinfected, that whack-a-mole game coming in. And then you can see the list of things that goes on underneath this. I need to start recovery. I need to understand the root causes of how they came in. And in many cases, I need to build an entire new infrastructure because I might not trust that my old infrastructure is ever going to be secure like it was before. There are also some legal conversations that need to be happening at the same time. If you are choosing to pay the ransom and decrypt your information, depending on your organization, you may need to understand whether that data still has integrity for you. For example, if you lost custody of a file and you're a law firm, does the chain of custody get broken, and therefore is the data valuable for you or not? Let me tell you a story of another organization that decided to, oh, backwards, there we go, of another organization that decided to deal with a Conti breach. This was a pharmaceutical organization. They dealt with Conti differently. And in fact, this case, the client, I apologize, did pay the ransom. Their emails were offline, their SCADA and OT systems were offline, they had a breach response firm engaged, major clients were informed, and what they found is that it was very difficult for them to learn how much coverage they would get from their insurance company and their breach response firm. At one point, this organization learned that their cyber insurance and their breach response would only cover the initial point of entry, which was one corporate system, and not their email system, which was running in the cloud, even though they were all using the same credentials. So the firm became mired 40% overhead in how they managed the response and how they dealt with the scope of the coverage. Over 3 weeks of outage, the first week just to determine whether recovery was possible, and then the second weeks to actually negotiate with the criminals, get the ransomware decryption keys, and figure out whether or not they were going to get live and up and running. One lesson for this organization was that they had to pay the ransom because their offsite backups were not effective. They were not running frequently enough, they were not tested, they could not trust them. The cost of weeks of downtime was too high. They determined it was cheaper for them to pay the ransom and get access to production data than try to recover from a 2-month-old tape. This organization lost weeks of downtime because of lack of preparation and because of confusion about the scope of what their insurance organization covered off for them. There's lessons in here for both types of organizations. How do you prepare? How do you respond? Now, I'm going to move quickly into advice and AMA, and I just want to ask one last poll here, coming back to that advice question. I'd like to know how many organizations who are attending have already developed an incident response plan or playbook that is detailed enough that you're confident that it works well. Who has a good cybersecurity response plan and playbook, either before or after a breach, that you feel confident that you could use? Now, while we're waiting, Matthew, you told us a statistic earlier today. What did you learn about the number of firms that have done this kind of incident response preparation?
Well, stats that I have from a research done at Boston College says 30% of American enterprises have done incident response, and those that have done it actually have a lower total cost of cybersecurity costs.
That's a low number, folks, 30%. I'm curious to see what our poll results are. Maybe we can close the poll and get a sense of what the numbers look like there. What I've seen is that that number gets lower and lower as I move into corporate and private sector. You know what? The state, the federal, the municipal level organizations, they're pretty good. But as I move into private sector, fewer and fewer have them. This is a good audience. 57% saying yes. You know what, guys? Even if they're not perfect, you are a step ahead of a lot of your peers and competitors. Those are good numbers to see, and they're deeply relevant. We're getting close to the end. I want to leave a few seconds for questions and answers, so I'm going to speed through some of these slides. Those of you who want to get the written version of what our guidance is, drop us a line after the webinar. We'll be happy to share this stuff with you. There are 2 slides in here about what you should do corporately, 1 slide in here about what you could do at home. So I'll just speak to them quickly. You don't need to write this down. But I would say that the first thing is training your teams. Awareness training matters. And not just any awareness training, hybrid, effective awareness training. You know what, guys? It's not good enough that you just went out and bought a phishing package. It's not good enough that you just fish yourself from a catalog. You need to do awareness training that changes the culture and the behavior of the organization. So make sure that you do that really well. Make sure that you don't publish information that is sensitive. Don't make a hacker's reference guide on your website if you're concerned about that. If you're publishing your org chart, names, titles, email addresses, teach your staff that that's going to be used against them, or don't publish it. You got to be conscious of how you're presenting your profile online. And absolutely train your team in critical thinking with creative and disruptive techniques. Some of the other things that you need to train your IT and your cyber teams about, there are more than 7 points, but I like these ones in particular. If you do these 7 things, back up your data, know what your priorities are in terms of recovery, what's your most important thing to protect. Again, I've had clients where we say, what do you recover first? And they say, let me go talk to executive and I'll get back to you. Wrong. Know your priorities. Secure your email first. Patch and update everything all of the time. Nobody should be using single-factor authentication unless you've got a good business reason for it. Always multi-factor. If you are using single-factor, you're using a password manager with strong passwords, right? Get your heads wrapped around zero trust. It's a little bit of a loose term, folks, but the concept behind it says assume that you're breached and put layered controls on your endpoints as a principle. These are good things to do. And certainly I would encourage you to go cloud first. In fact, today, there are arguably better cybersecurity controls built into a cloud infrastructure than there are into a traditional on-prem infrastructure. Now, because we all work from home, here's a few other things that you need to think about. A lot of these are similar, but you can see that there's a little bit of a personal aspect. Don't use shared Wi-Fi. Make sure that you're using secure remote access. Know how to back up your own personal data, and get a good home Wi-Fi router. Don't use the one that your ISP gave you because they're generally not as secure. And in fact, your ISP can usually get access to your own infrastructure if you don't change things from the default. For larger organizations, one thing that I want you all to think about is how you assess your own risk. These are the things that an enterprise should be doing. And they can guide this by conducting what we call a threat and risk assessment or an all hazards cybersecurity assessment that helps us understand what are your assets, what are your threats, what are your vulnerabilities, and what are you going to do about it. I would recommend that mid and large size organizations make this kind of investment. There are good templates, or you can bring it out to market, but you should do these types of things end to end. I'm going to pause here. I'm looking at the time. We're at the end of the session or very close to it, and turn it back to Rich if there's any Q's and A's from the audience that you'd like us to cover off.
Let's try this again. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
You got it. Oh, there we go. I knew that was going to happen. All right, for the first one, this comes from Marcus. Offsite backups. Do you mean backups to cloud?
They can be backups to cloud, Marcus. What's important is that they are not permanently connected to your infrastructure. So if you're backing up to a cloud or you're using a technology product to be able to do that, it should establish the connection, do the backup, disconnect. It's still not always a replacement for having a good old off-net backup for a larger enterprise that has that kind of infrastructure.
Okay, P-Val, she wants a copy, or that person, I'm not sure the gender there, but wants a copy of your guideline on the recovery response. We'll follow up on that afterwards. Next question, Adam. There's a lot of questions coming in, so bear with me. Adam wants to know what percentage of current ransomware attacks involve data exfiltration from their targets?
You know, I don't know the actual percentage, but what I can tell you is that it is now the norm. Double extortion ransomware has replaced the regular old school ransomware almost entirely. If you are breached using a product that is going to do data exfiltration and crypting.
Okay, several folks are asking for the presentation. Folks, as always, we will get this presentation to you, trust me. Go ahead and email me at rich.longo@flycastpartners.com, or you can email info@flycastpartners.com. We'll make sure you get it. Next question, after having an initial discussion about ransomware like we did today, what would be the recommended next steps and what should be our focus?
So if you're small or mid-size, okay, there's two ways I'm going to answer this question. First of all, guys, girls, there's a lot of really good guidance online. You don't need people like me and Flycast to tell you the fundamentals. You know what those fundamentals are. You've seen some of them in the deck. So I think if you're a small and mid-sized organization, avail yourself of the baseline resources that are out there. Send us an email if you want more access of where to go. Even the federal government in the States has got great tools out there. Do those basics. Get your policies and standards in place as well, because if you are breached and you find yourself in a situation to demonstrate whether you had due diligence, whether you did your homework, you are going to be audited and you're going to expected to be having policies, standards, effective cybersecurity controls. Now, if you're a mid or a larger size organizations, there's two things I want to know that you've done. The first is that you have done your homework. You have done your own risk assessment. You know what's most critical. You know how hackers might break in. You know what your priorities are, and you know what your roadmap is. The second thing that I want mid and large size organizations to do, and we do not do this enough, go beyond the tabletop exercise. Make a ransomware breach simulation. Create a little bit of malware, put it into your network, see whether your managed security service provider helps you find it and respond to it, bring it up to the board and have the board run through a tabletop exercise at that stage, from technology to tabletop. Do a simulation like that. I promise you're going to be better off for your ransomware breach in the future.
Okay, and then Mr. Fenton wants to know, I heard something about new White House guidelines for protecting against ransomware. Can you cover that really quick?
I didn't quite catch that. New what guidelines?
New White House guidelines for protecting against ransomware. Can you cover that real fast?
This is a very quickly moving target. I think the first comment I would make with regards to the White House's direction on guidelines for cybersecurity is we're going to see more and more of them. Take a look at what CISA has said out of the feds. In fact, they are asking private sector to play their part and improve cybersecurity. The guidelines, first and foremost, were focusing on federal departments and agencies, and they basically said, get your act together, be disruptive, move faster, break some things if you have to, but you got to improve cybersecurity. What we're going to see the feds doing for the private sector, a big push of knowledges, templates, resources, and perhaps even simple tools for people to use.
Okay, and that's all the questions we have. We just have people requesting the presentation. Folks, my inbox is filling up fast with your requests. We will get to your requests. We'll make sure everyone that wants it will get a copy of this recording once we get it edited out. Aaron and Matthew, there's a lot of folks here that are saying they really appreciate it. It was a great presentation. It was very informative and very timely. Marcus says it's very timely. There's several folks here that are very thankful for the presentation today.
If one or two of you folks execute the stuff that we're talking about in here, you won't know how thankful you're going to be because you won't be breached. So I hope that helps a lot of you make improvement. Go ahead.
One quick question. Patrick wants to know, did the decryption keys work once purchased?
Not always. Some things happen with decryption keys. First of all, decryption keys don't always work on older infrastructure. So if you get decryption keys, you try and put it on that old Windows server or you're running Linux, you're out of luck. You don't have the ability. Second thing that happens is that the decryption keys sometimes work, but not on every file. What I will tell you though, is that there is that expression, honor among thieves. Most of the time, if I pay for a decryption key, it will work as intended because they want a good brand. They want a good reputation. If the insurance firms know that when they're dealing with REBL, encryption keys are only 30% likely, they won't pay ransom. So in general, you can get support for decryption keys and they do work.
Okay, and with that, we're going to wrap up. There's some people saying they have to go, and unfortunately, they don't want to leave, which is a good problem to have here. So, folks, any questions that you have, we are going to get to you. We'll make sure that we get to you, and we'll get your questions answered. And any questions, go ahead and send them. We'll get answers. We'll get the presentation for you. Once again, Aaron and Matthew, thank you so much for the presentation today. It is appreciated.
Rich, we want to thank Flycast partners, and we're here for you and for your clients moving forward. And thanks a lot for this. This was a great event.
Folks, thank you for taking time out of your busy day. We know how busy you are, so thank you for your time. And until our next broadcast, please stay safe out there, and we'll see you next time around.